Common Core to start. Common Core is basically math and English standards. But when adopted by a state, the state will replace their existing standards with the Common Core standards. And so this was put together by a few friends, and I helped work on it. And for me, Common Core is much bigger than just that English, language arts, and math standards. It's an entire education reform package that I personally believe is heading our country down the wrong direction. And so that's why I'm fighting it so hard. We aren't going to have time to go through all of this tonight, but I just wanted you to see that really Common Core is just a portion of a much larger education reform package that helps tie together a lot of progressive education ideas. So we're told that the Common Core standards were state-led. I believe that this is an unfounded fact. There's two organizations that tout themselves as starting Common Core. It is the Chief Council of State School Officers and the National Governors Association. Now those, when I first heard those names, they sound like official government organizations. Come to find out, they're not. These are non-governmental organizations that are not held accountable to the people. They do have some governors and some state superintendents on the committees. They don't govern it. So basically what they are organizations that are creating policy for our states, not held accountable to the people, and then they're turning around and lobbying our legislators to put in their ideas. So I'm going to go through a timeline really quickly. This started before February of 2009, but this is really where the Common Core state standards were really catapulted into our American society. Was starting right here in February of 2009 when the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act was signed. There had been talk previous to this of creating common standards, but in the board meetings I've been listening to, they were under the impression that it would be more of a regional thing than a nationwide set of standards. So in April of 2009, there was a meeting in Chicago, and the state's members of the CCSSO and the NGA, which is the Governors Association and the Superintendent Association, went to the different states and asked them to meet in Chicago for this meeting. However, many states say things like this. West Ed, which is an arm of the U.S. Department of Ed, has asked us to create common standards. This is a Utah State School Board meeting. These are audio minutes. There's a great momentum behind national common standards. I would say it's the expectation of the Secretary of Education, Arne Duncan, that we move into that environment within the next 2 or 3 years. Are we the only ones that are saying things like this? No. This is from Maryland State School Board meeting minutes. And they say that we'll be meeting with the staff at the U.S. Department of Education to discuss national standards. Why is there such a discrepancy? The state office is telling us that these are state-led, and then the audio from around the country is painting a different picture. There's another state, I didn't make a slide for it, but Kentucky said that they have been working for quite a long time with the Department of Ed to create common national standards. This is from May, and it says the reason why this has become more on the front burner, why this is Common Core state standards, is because the NGA and CCSSO have received some funding to go ahead and start developing Common Core. They're willing to do all of this for free, but only if we sign by Monday. And then they say there's no pressure there. Now they're willing to do this isn't the Department of Ed. This is a lot of private organizations. Achieve was mentioned, Pearson, the Gates Foundation. There's a whole bunch of private organizations that are pouring their money into this, and they're all coming together at this time with the stimulus money. So in June of 2009, the Race to the Top for assessments was announced. There's another one called the Race to the Top that was announced the next month. Now they're different, and I'm going to go into them briefly, but in a minute. So December of 2009, the state office is scrambling to fill out our application. So as the last two slides show, there were two races going on at the same time. One was for assessments, and one was for the individual states to apply for money, and they had different conditions. The one for an individual state, you got points for doing certain things, so nothing was mandatory, nothing was pushed down on you, but money. It's always a great motivator to do things that maybe aren't in the best interest of our children. And so they had all this money coming in, and they got points for doing things, but at the same time, simultaneous, they had the assessment one. And in the assessment consortium, or the assessment race, that was mandatory requirements. They had to adopt standards that were college and career ready standards, and they had to join a consortium. There was a requirement on how many minimum states were in those consortiums. And then you turn around and the consortium of states, which was the one we joined was called Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium. They had a requirement that you must adopt Common Core. So in February of 2010, this associate superintendent started talking about how they were scrambling. They'd already turned in the application in January, but they were just under immense pressure to get this application. And I can't remember how many man hours, Renee probably knows, it's like 500 man hours, 650 man hours to get this turned in. And so, to me, the reason I'm showing you these slides is because it paints a picture of pressure and swiftness and not thinking through what we're doing. And now, members of the state office are telling us that they did all of this to raise the standards. But in the audio I listened to from April to December, I only heard talk about money. Look at all this money, laughing about how it's a race to the money, not a race to the top, and it'll be all children left behind instead of no children left behind. I mean, it didn't seem like they were really seriously thinking about it because there was so much pressure to get all of this filled out so quick. And so to join Smarter Balance, there were some requirements. And then, so this is some basic requirements to join those. We had to implement the Common Core standards no later than December 31st, 2011, have the assessment system. And then to get out, there were requirements also. Now, we were fortunate enough to vote in our state school board with enough pressure from this community to get out of the Smarter Balance Assessment Consortium, which was tied to federal money. But the reason I bring this up is because what's the final step? States get final approval from the U.S. Department of Ed. Does that sound like something we have control of? No, and so we voted to get out. And I wrote a letter to the state office and I said, how is the process of getting out of SBAC? And they said, we're done. Here's the letters, we're done. And I said, what about the final step? Do you want to know what they said? Oh, that's SBAC's job. Who did we give control to? Do we control that anymore? No, we just gave away our control over something that should be a state-led thing to someone else. And so they didn't return my emails after that because they don't have the answer. I told them that I would have to go ahead and contact SBAC for them since it's out of their hands. Okay, so June 2nd, final version of the standards is released. June 4th is the first reading that our state office, our state school board had of the standards. August 6th, a couple months later, we adopted them. And we agreed to adopt them in their entirety and that we can add up to 15%. States were coerced with a lot of money.
What do you mean by add up to 15%? I'm sorry.
You know, that's a good question that is not being answered. How does that look? I'm going to go through what the official documents say in a few minutes. But the state is making it sound like these are minimum standards, but all the documentation is saying something different. And so I'm not getting answers from that point. And so they're saying in individual standards. I'll go through a couple slides that show that in just a few minutes. Okay, so the states were coerced with a lot of money to adopt this. So the first one, and I believe all the points I have here except for the last one are all from the Recovery Act and from the stimulus bill. So there is a fund called the State Fiscal Stabilization Fund, and I just found this today. I knew about this, but I didn't realize that it was tied to education reform. One of the requirements, states must give assurance of standards reform. they don't mention Common Core by name, but in the Federal Register, I was looking through it today, it says that the Department of Ed recognizes the effort the states were doing, and they applauded that effort, and that they needed to go ahead and provide assurance that they were going to move forward with education reform to be able to get this money. Utah got, okay, I said 200 million, I believe it was almost 400 million. So 81% of the money was supposed to go to education, and then the other percent goes to some sort of government fund, goes through the governor's office. And so race to the top. We didn't get any money, but we were coerced with money, and we were given points, as I went over earlier. Race to the top for assessments. States were required to join a consortium to get this amount of money. Race to the top for the district is currently going on. Renee, my friend, told me that it was supposed to be today or yesterday that the deadline was. They've extended it because of the hurricane. And so the race to the top for the districts is offering money directly to the districts instead of to the states. So states like Texas, Virginia, Alaska, they chose not to adopt this education reform. Their districts now can go through and get this money and agree to the requirements from the thing. So the Department of Ed is circumventing our states to get directly to the districts. No Child Left Behind waivers. The No Child Left Behind waivers were difficult to receive without joining the Common Core Standards effort. There are two options for standards. One is to join a consortium of states, well, it doesn't say consortium, it says to have college and career standards that are common with a significant number of states. And then the other option was to have standards that all the higher ed institutes in the state approved, and with final approval coming from the Department of Ed. The state of Utah chose option A, and we used as our evidence that we had joined on with the Common Core State Standards effort. So what I'm seeing is that Common Core State Standards plus the assessments, which thankfully we were able to get out of, but this is much larger than just our state, is leading us on the road to a nationalized curriculum. Why does this matter? In the Constitution, it gives no provision for the federal government to be overseeing education directly. This is supposed to be a state thing. Senator Marco Rubio wrote a letter to Secretary Duncan stating these three laws that it breaks. So first of all, a lot of people didn't like No Child Left Behind, right? A lot of people didn't like it. People aren't happy about it in the education system, but it's still a law. And the president circumvented Congress because they weren't coming together to accept his blueprint for reform, which he had written out. And so he said, well, Congress isn't acting, so I will. And he said, so they basically walked around Congress and issued these waivers, which is in essence breaking a federal law. And then it also breaks the Education Organization Act and the General Education Provisions Act as they're moving forward with these things. So when I first started looking into this, I would go to our state office's website, and it used to be that you would go to the website and you would see a screen similar to this, and when you clicked on the core standards, it would lead you directly to corestandards.org, who are the authors behind the Common Core State Standards. Now, you have to kind of move around a bunch, and you find the curriculum by standards, and then you can finally find this one's just the ELA standards that I have highlighted. You click on them, and this is the ELA standards. Now, the reason I bring this up is because when I looked at it, I thought, to somebody that hasn't researched like I have, the state office is telling people that these are our standards, we own them, we can do whatever we want with them, but the documentation and evidence is mounting against that philosophy. And so this disturbed me because this looks like they're trying to say that these are our standards. Next page. These look like Utah's. 2 pages later, copyright, NGA, CCSSO. But the thing that really got me when I found this a couple days ago is that they were modified in July with permission. So I wrote the state office and asked what was modified and who did we get permission from? And I didn't receive a reply. because the standards are copyrighted. This is from Core Standards Public License, and it says, NGA Center and CCSSO shall be acknowledged as the sole owners and developers of the Common Core State Standards, and no claims to the contrary shall be made. So you may be thinking, why does this matter? These are minimum standards. It doesn't matter if we own them because we can add them, we can make them our own, we can do whatever we want and make them Utah's because they're just minimum standards. Well, do you remember the audio from the thing I had from the school board minutes when we adopted them and we agreed to adopt them in their entirety? And we can only add up to 15%? Well, there are many documents that have that guideline. This is from the minutes of the August 6, 2010 State School Board meeting, we accept all of the standards as they are written, and a state may add up to 15% or more. Achieve is one of the primary authors of the standards, and they had a guideline for implementation, and they have one called the 15% guideline. It was taken down off their website, but I had a copy of it. And it says, remember, a central driver in the creation of the Common Core State Standards was to develop standards that were common across state lines. A literal interpretation by states of the 15% guideline would undermine the very reason the states developed the Common Core Standards in the first place. They don't even want you to add it. And when we were part of West Ed, my friend contacted them and they said, we won't test you. You can add it, but we aren't going to test you on it. So it's really a move to have everybody the same. And we all know, well, I guess I'm not a teacher, but I have a lot of friends that are teachers, and testing really drives what they teach, especially with the new teacher evaluation systems that are being put into place. So this is from the Federal Register of 2009 for the Race to the Top. It has the same 15% guideline for the standards in the Race to the Top. Now, this one is the most critical because the only place that the state of Utah has a contract for any of this education reform that I can find right now is the No Child Left Behind waiver. And people were so excited to get out of No Child Left Behind, but the truth is we didn't get out. It's a provisional waiver that only got us out of a couple portions of the waiver of the No Child Left Behind law, and it's only for another year. And then we have to reapply. And when you reapply, usually there's more strings attached. So now, as Margaret Dayton says, we have No Child Left Behind and Common Core. So, you know, I looked up, this is not an application, because our state office says that what we did was we put a letter from Arnie Duncan in our application, and he says that we can do whatever we want with the standards. Well, he wrote that letter to our governor and to our superintendent before this contract was put into place. And so the state office, I've asked them if they could write a letter explicitly getting Utah out of the definition page, because it says right there that we have done this, and we put as our evidence in the No Child Left Behind waiver for fulfilling that requirement as that we had adopted Common Core. Now, why does this matter?
And you should point out that the Utah State Office didn't even know about that definition page until you informed them of it.
You're right, they didn't. So. Okay, so why does this matter? This is an ideological shift from the traditional way of Americans educate. It is moving to a workforce training system. On the surface, this sounds good. It sounds good to say, hey, when my kids get out of high school, they're going to be able to get whatever job they want. They're going to be great workers. My son told me the other day, he's a sophomore, that he got certified to be a drafter last year as a freshman. So I said, well, maybe we should put you to work. We'll go get you a job then right now. Mark Tucker. He was, or is, a main mover and shaker in this whole education reform idea. In 1992, he wrote a letter to Senator Clinton, and he told her that he wanted to fundamentally transform the entire American system of education to a seamless web that literally extends from cradle to grave and is the same system for everyone, coordinated by a system of labor market boards at the local, state, and federal levels, where curriculum and job matching will be handled by counselors accessing the integrated computer-based program. Tucker's ambitious plan was implemented in 3 laws, and those were put in earlier presidencies. But I know that there's people in this room that really, really fought that in the 90s, and I thank them for their efforts. Well, it's just coming back in a different way. So this is more of a letter, and it says to bypass the elected officials on school boards and in state legislatures by making federal funds flow to the governor. We have that right now. Have you heard of Prosperity 2020? I haven't spent a lot of time researching yet, and it sounds great. We've got all the business leaders in the community. They're coming together with the governor. They're going to go read to the kids. The kids need it. They're going to go read to them. They're going to help them. It sounds great on the surface until you think. It's a philosophical difference. Do you want your child to be raised for a specific job? Or do you want them to be able to be raised to think and create and be anybody that they want to be? Because that's what made America great. The founders were thinkers. They studied the great philosophers of the time and of the past history. And they were able to come up with a system of government that has never been seen in any part of the world before, because they were able to innovate and think. And that is what moved America forward to be the best and most powerful country in the world. And we're trying to now move to a system to follow some European models. Senator Duncan in 2010 talks about their vision for reform. And he says that traditionally the federal government in the U.S. has had a limited role in education policy, but the Obama administration has sought to fundamentally shift the federal role. Have we heard that term with President Obama before, fundamentally change something? So that the department is doing much more to support reform and innovation in the states, districts, and local communities. Now, it sounds great to support something somebody's doing, but when you're pushing so much money at them that it's hard for them to refuse what you're offering because they're worried, especially in a state like ours where we're the lowest funded state in the nation for education, it's almost impossible to refuse this money. He talks about the programs that they put in. Now, if you go down to about the middle of that, he says 46 states submitted applications, and the competition drove a national conversation about education reform. 32 states changed specific laws that posed historical barriers to innovation, and even states that did not win awards now have a roadmap for reform hammered out. He gave these remarks to UNESCO. Who's UNESCO? They are the education arm of the United Nations. And he told them in this talk that he would be working with them. He then goes on to talk about the 21st century skills, and he says at the very bottom, but today 37 states and the District of Columbia have already chosen to adopt the new state-crafted Common Core standards, not studying it, not thinking about it, not issuing a white paper. They actually did it. He sounds surprised. I can't believe my plan worked. Nobody even thought about it. They just did it. This is from this summer. I found this today also. I just wanted to show you how we're moving to a workforce model. So Secretary Duncan, gave a speech to the National Academy for Foundation Next conference this summer. And he talked about if the president gets reelected, he has a proposed $1 billion investment in career academies. Career academies. So these standards are telling us that we are making it so that our kids are ready for college and career. Well, when I was looking through the Achieve Implementation Guide today, I saw a chart. I didn't have time to make it into a slide, but it showed something that I've seen several other places before. And it shows that the lowest level of graduation, it just gets you to like a 2-year college. If you do a little bit better, you're then qualified. Or actually, the lowest level gets you to a career path. Career academy, maybe. If you do a little bit better in school, you might be in the middle section and you get a degree that will move you to a 2-year college. But if you want to really succeed, you have to take AP and IB. Do you want to know what IB is? International Baccalaureate. It is directly linked straight to the United Nations education arm. They're completely circumventing not just our state, but our country. This is disturbing to me. To achieve the goal, we've launched a comprehensive cradle to career reform. I put a video on Facebook the other day that I found from another friend of ours. So some of you have probably seen it, of a man in Sweden who homeschools. And kids are near and dear to me, so thinking of taking my babies and tracking them, it gets to me. And the people are fleeing Sweden, and they're going to islands off the coast of Finland so that they have the freedom to educate their kids as they see fit. You don't think America could get there? If we aren't paying attention and vigilant in what's going on, it very well could get there. I am not here tonight to tell you that people in our local communities, schools, are bad people, or in our state office are bad people. But there is a real agenda behind this movement, and we luckily have a lot of good people in the state. And so only little bits and pieces of it are trickling down to your level, but they're coming. Now, I know some of you may not be members of the LDS Church, but I think that this quote applies to anybody, regardless of your religion. I cannot speak for the welfare of children without implications for the choices being made by citizens, public officials, and workers in private organizations. Children are highly vulnerable. They have little or no power to protect or provide for themselves, and little influence on so much that is vital to their well-being. Children need others to speak for them, and they need decision makers who will put their well-being ahead of selfish adult interest. There's a lot of money in Common Core. This is outdated. There's much more money than this. There may be a little bit of selfish interest involved in this. Thank you. I just want you to think about that. Think about where you think America should be heading with our education.